Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. I think we've got a new member this morning. So, Councillor Hurst, you're new this morning. Do you want to introduce yourself? Councillor Hurst, did you want to introduce yourself to the rest of the board?
Stephen, can you?
Good morning. My name is Stephen Hurst. I am a county councillor with Gloucestershire County Council.
Welcome.
I represent them as employers.
It might be helpful to you if we all introduce ourselves. So I'm Sean Collins. I'm head of pensions at the Oxfordshire Pension Fund, and Matthew and I act as independent chairs of each other's boards. So I'm here as an independent chairman. I know which order we can go in. John, you've been around the longest. Do you want to go next?
Hi, my name's John Toppin. I'm the Head of Policy and Resources at Gloucester City Council. And as Sean says, I've been on the board as long as Sean, so there you go, from the start. Thank you.
Michael?
Hi, Michael Hunt. I'm an employee representative representing Unison and employees at Gloucester City Council.
John?
Hi, John Abbott. I'm the branch secretary of the Gloucestershire County Unison, and I'm here in that capacity.
I can't see it. Have we got any, who else have we got here today?
We have apologies from Paul Jones and Annette Benson today.
Okay, so that's the board members then, and the rest are guests.
They are,
So,
yeah.
so presumably, Matthew, you know everybody.
Yeah, I'm obviously meeting Councillor Hurst for the first time since his appointment, so welcome. I'm Matthew, the Head of Pensions at Gloucester, here to help the board move through activity. And we've got Daniel Canaris and Scott Campbell from Aon today. So we'll hopefully you'll remember them sat and observed the previous board meeting, and they're here for agenda item 7 on the governance review when we get to that bit, Sean.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Andrew, you've done apologies. So if we move to the minutes of the last meeting. My version looks like it's got a couple of typos on the attendees. I've got a Jones and a Hunt, but no first names.
Well, I should be down as Michael Hunt.
Apologies,
sure.
I will amend that. For some reason, they've been bumped off. I think the columns have moved. Apologies, I'll amend.
Are there any other issues from the minutes in terms of accuracy? People want me to page them? Or people happy to accept them as an accurate minute?
I'm happy.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept them.
Thank you.
Were there any matters of rising that aren't on the agenda elsewhere?
Not particularly. There was only one action point, which is around a work plan, and we'll cover that in some detail in item 7, but also in item 6 as well, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. We've then got the minutes of the Pension Fund Committee. We're simply asked to note those. Does anybody have any matters of rise they want to pick up from the minutes of the Pension Committee meeting? We start with the 4th of December. No indications. And then the 29th of January.
So, Sean, are you on the right pack? It should just be the minutes.
Yes, I'm reading from the agenda. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the minutes of the last meeting. That's what I've done wrong. Sorry. I was going to say it sounded like a long time ago.
It was, yeah.
So there.
I've got the minutes of the 18th of June. Does that sound better?
That does.
Right. All right. Now we're on the right papers. Has anybody got any questions they want to raise?
No, nobody's indicating.
Okay. that's the case, are we happy to move on to agenda item 4, which is presumably, Matthew, it's you to introduce?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So agenda item 4 starts on page 13 of your pack. So we'll refer to the large page numbers on there. Runs through to page 33. There's a few appendix in there, but I'll just kind of summarise this. This report here is obviously a report to be noted by the board, as it is by the committee as well, in terms of the operations of the pension fund as at the 31st of March 2021. It covers the overall position of the fund, the investment operations, governance issues, and importantly, administration as well, and where we sit with the administration. If we look at page 13, I think in summary, the funding position of the fund, we remain in a very healthy position at this moment in time. What we're also looking to do with the actuary is the way that we actually evaluate how the fund is performing. A lot of people will remember we talk about funding levels, about percentages of the assets versus the liability, and there's a lot of assumptions that go in behind that. But one of the important factors is around the future of the investment return, which obviously drives all of that. So we're trying to look at this in a different way when we're actually looking at the objectives of the fund and what the fund is actually trying to achieve in the longer term when it's looking at its assets and liabilities. So, as we know, there is an assumption that the long-term forecast of investment returns will be 4.1%. That's inbuilt within there. In the previous valuation, the assumption was 4.2 on the long-term forecast. That has eased back to the 4.1 at this moment in time. But obviously, the fund performance has been better than that during that period of time. So what we've actually seen is that the amount of additional assets that the fund holds since the previous valuation, where back in March 2019, that was evaluated at 41 million. That additional assets now currently sit at 409 million. What that means, to a certain degree, is that the need for additional benefits, for payments, and also investment return has been reduced. So in theory, the fund could sustain a greater fall in its investment performance, even down to that likelihood of around 3.2% before it starts to actually come back into a territory where the assets are not in excess of the liabilities of the particular fund. But what it also does is increases the likelihood of the required rate of return that is actually being there. So actually what's actually happening now is the likelihood of us actually achieving our objectives in the longer term is increasing as a result of the position we find ourselves. So we move from 71% to 80%. So what we will be trying to do with committee and also with yourselves as board is actually look over the longer term of our investment strategy, our investment requirements, and whether we're meeting those in terms of that funding position and how that actually sits in the longer term. There is a more detailed report from Hyman's at Appendix 1 on there. And what we will be doing is building some of this into some training sessions that we will be bringing through because it is a slight change on there. But the ultimate position is that we are actually in a very good position at this moment in time. We have more assets than we have liabilities. If we look at the quarter to the 31st of March and just over that one quarter, we did see another increase of a 1.9% over that particular quarter. So the fund is just valued just under the 3 billion at 2.89 at that point in time in March. I think where we are sitting at the end of June, I think for the first time the fund had tipped just over the £3 billion mark. But obviously we've had significant movements in stock market since then as well. But so, and we are still making positive moves. If you look at the 3 years, on that side, we're slightly behind the benchmark, but that 3 years, which is the time horizons between the valuation, we're actually returned 7.6%. So it's a good outcome, especially with obviously what we've been through during that period of time. As part of that, if we look at page 13, we talk about investment activity. So I think on page 14, the investment activity. The committee is still moving through on the review, and there are still some rebalancing of the portfolio that has taken place. So we have seen some strategic changes that have been affected during that to maintain the fund to its strategic allocations. We have obviously made additional commitments to the private markets to maintain those private markets allocations, and those funds, the way that those work, those funds cannot be invested immediately. They will be drawn down over a period of time as those investments go through into private equity, private debt and infrastructure. So the fund is now operating with the Diversified Returns Fund to actually hold that money in they're waiting for cool down into those private market investments. So that's the vehicle that we're utilising on that side. I think there is an appendix on page 33, which talks of where we are on that strategic asset allocation at the moment and the work the committee is doing to maintain and monitor that strategic asset allocation and rebalance as appropriate, within there. Then I think importantly, if we look at fund administration, I'll just give you a bit.
Want to pause there?
Okay, I can take questions at that stage. Yep. Are there any questions on those two particular items of where the fund sits at this moment in time? I'm not sure if there are. Okay.
Putting your hands up, no.
Please do come back with any questions as we move through.
I can ask one then.
Go on then, Sean.
Given the improved funding position, has the committee considered changing its asset allocation to take some risk off the table?
Not at this moment in time specifically. The committee, as we talk a little bit later on, the committee is concerned over inflation risk that may start to come through into the market, and is doing and has asked the independent advisor and myself to do some work and analysis about the risks that the fund faces on inflation at this time. I think there is still a viewpoint that even though we are in a reasonable position at this moment in time in terms of that, I think we are still very cognizant that the future benefit cost of the LGPS is increasing when you look at the cost envelope. So we are potentially reducing the pressure on the position or the needs of the employers, maintaining the strategy that we have. We will go into a valuation next March. And the outcome of that will then obviously determine, and we will then undertake a strategy review of our strategy. And it may well be linked with the inflation risk exposure that it might be prudent to look to de-risking the fund slightly within there. But we are obviously an open pension fund, so those liabilities continue to manoeuvre. So our time horizons are a lot longer than if we were a closed LGPS fund or a closed fund where you know that you've got an end goal that you're actually aiming for, and when you're in these periods that you would take that risk off the table, because obviously we don't know where we will go through in those market cycles in the longer term on that side, Sean. So is it something that obviously within Oxford and your own analysis obviously is a comparator fund? I would assume that because we're all operating to similar markets in your position, is that something that your fund's looking at this time?
Probably on the same timeline you've talked about as part of the 2022 valuation process. But yes, the Oxfordshire Fund is in a similar position.
That's good.
Okay. Any other questions on the investment part of this report before Matthew moves on to the administration? I don't think so, Matthew. Do you want to move on?
Okay, so on to administration, page 15 on there. Looking at the tables, table 1 on page 15, the team are still coping well, despite the changes to the enforced changes to their working practices in respect of COVID. Compared to year on year, we are focusing on the key activities within the team. So that's the employees that are retiring and the death. So those that are involving actually monetary payments, people retiring, obviously where unfortunately our members have passed away, and the dependents. Those are the key critical focus areas that we are focusing our attention on in terms of there. So we prioritise those above some of the other activity that we actually see at this time. But the team are still operating well. You may be aware that the way that the team are operating at the moment, is that half of the administration team are in the office for a week, and half of them are at home, and then they switch around on a week-on-week basis because of the way that their practices and procedures are operating at this moment in time. So, as I said, it is enforced in terms of we're still operating under COVID, and we don't really see that changing in the short term. And potentially for the remainder of 2021 as we go cautiously forward on that. We have got an impending statutory deadline with regard to annual benefit statements and the production and the issuing of those as at the 31st of August. And I'm pleased to say that we're on track with that at this moment in time. And we should be meeting our statutory deadline with regard to the production of those annual benefit statements. I think if we look at table 2 on page 16, number of retirements has remained steady. We are expecting other areas to pick up over time as we come back to some form of normality. Obviously, you know, the transient workforce that you would normally see over a period of time maybe has been less so during these periods. And obviously, as we come out of COVID and the economy recovers, we need to see what those effects are as we go through. But what we are seeing continually is an increase in the level of cases that we have through the years on that side of things. So, and we don't see that changing because of the increasing membership numbers that we see year on year, and also the increasing employer numbers that we see year on year as well. So I don't see, you know, we see anything on that side. So I'd say that you know, it's still very good progress. The administration team are doing a sterling job at this moment in time in the environment that we work. And I'll just cover the business plan if I can, Sean, and then I'll stop there and take any questions on the two. As we know, the business plan that was agreed into the 21-22, and just bringing back to yourselves, and this obviously goes to committee as well, an overview of the activities that we would say that we were undertaking during the quarters in terms of governance, funding, investment management and administration. We are making good progress in the majority of areas. Some of them that are amber are longer term issues. So if we look under investment management, things like the responsible investment reporting, we're working closely with Brunel. That's an ongoing project that will take throughout the year. We're just waiting for some of those movements to come through, as well as the work that we're doing on inflation exposure is just starting at that particular point. If we look at some of the key ones on the administration, we're waiting for some guidance around McLeod, which I think is imminent shortly in terms of the operational factors of McLeod, which we will touch on when we talk on the annual report later, which I think will be one of the bigger key areas for administration. But again, we're waiting for some of that information to come through. In terms of the budget forecasting, obviously it's not included this time. It wasn't included this time for committee because it was too early within the cycle. The committee will receive that, and obviously that will be coming ongoing to yourselves on the board, so you can see where we're sitting, tracking to the agreed budget as well for the remainder of that year. So on that point, Sean, I'll hand back to any questions and hand back to yourself.
Okay. Any questions for Matthew on either the administration performance or the performance against the business plan? Can't see any hands up, Matthew. In that case, I think we're just simply asked to note the report. People happy to note the report? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to move us on then, Matthew, to the risk register?
Yeah, can do. So the next item is the risk register, standing item that comes through to committee and board on a quarterly basis. And I think, it's very, very important in terms of the risk exposures that we have. It's on page 35 of your packs is my covering report. The full risk register, hopefully well known and documented to you now on page 37, running through to page 50 on there. From the previous quarter, actually, fundamentally, there's no major changes to our risk register this quarter. We did fluctuate a few previously. So just to kind of highlight certainly some of the risks that we contain there around F1, which are the financial and the funding and the financial risks, the F1, F2, F4. There's been no material change to those, but we've just updated the commentary with regard to that. F6 it relates to what I muted before about the inflation exposure. That one obviously still remains elevated at the time, which was elevated previously. That still remains at an elevated rate as we go through the work, and we will bring that back to committee in terms of the inflation risk exposure that we have within the fund. Some other risks that remain heightened at this point around the resourcing and recruitment. As we know, additional resourcing was granted to the fund by committee in terms of the administration on that side. We're still working through the recruitment plan. The council have just launched a new recruitment system, which we've been waiting to actually be embedded in, and I've got to undergo some training next week to allow me then to be able to utilise that. So we'll move forward with that, but those risks remain heightened at this point because of until we actually get those resources in and move forward. And then just to note, I think risks G8 and F8 around the transition, we do, as I will mention later, I think just to note that those risks are likely to actually be removed from the risk register in the future in the form that they are as we end and come to the end of the transition plan to Brunel. Whether or not they are replaced by other risks, as we make that assessment, we will bring those back to yourselves as well. So Sean, are there any questions or observations or comments from any of the members with regard to the risk register, or any thoughts, please? For Sean, to you.
Okay, I can't see any hands up, Matthew. We're having a quiet morning this morning.
That item was very quiet at committee as well. I think we moved through on that one quite quickly. I think it just highlights actually there has been some changes that were made in respect of COVID. I think actually it was maybe the first quiet quarter that we've had in respect of the risks remaining stable for that period of time. But obviously we keep it under review on an ongoing basis.
Okay. If there are no comments or observations, I'll move us on to agenda item 6, which is the board annual report.
Thank you, Sean. So yeah, board annual report. Let me just make sure yeah. So board annual report. The actual annual report, the proposed draft annual report that I've put together on your behalf, on behalf of the board, is on pages 52 to 54. That's nice. It's actually 53 and 54. Apologies on that side. Every year, under the Constitution, the board needs to provide an annual report to the Pensions Committee and then onwardly to Gloucestershire County Council around its activities. The way that we do that is by placing an annual report from the Pensions Board within the fund's annual report, which is obviously approved and taken through committee. And then that annual report is also then tabled at a council meeting. It normally goes to the February council meeting and is part of the council agenda. So the way that we fulfil the obligations of the board reporting back is via the annual report. So your annual report that is in front of you is something that will then sit in the overall fund's annual report as it has done in the year on there. The report identifies and provides information on the business that's been conducted by the board with any of risks or concerns that the board actually have in terms of the fund's operation should be identified. So what I've done is I've put together an annual report, a draft annual report for your feedback, which covers the work that has happened through the meetings and covered at the October 2020 and March 21 board meetings. It also looks at the future work plan and the work that the board has done and the support that it's given to the training strategy and the governance review, but also that future work programme as well, looking forward into 21-22. and where the focus of the board's activity will be. I talked about a business, a work plan for committee. That's something that I will bring a slightly more detailed work plan on in terms of timeline with the valuation, the governance review. When Dan and Scott have talked to you about the governance review, there's a lot of activity which will feed into that work plan. So it felt right to get your feedback on that before moving that one through on that side. So I commend the annual report to you as is, or the draft annual report, and invite your feedback and comment, and ultimately seeking within that approval of what this annual report is, so it will move then forward onto the Pensions Committee and onwardly to the Council. So I'll pass back to yourself, Sean, on that one. Thank you.
Okay. Have any members of the board got any comments or observation on the draft report? Okay, I can't see any hands, Matthew. Just one comment from me. It's very similar to the format of the Oxfordshire report, except the Oxfordshire report includes a record of training undertaken by board members. Is that something you've considered, or was that presented anywhere else for Gloucestershire?
It is, I think, underneath the table of attendance, we do talk about joint training and updated training sessions with members of the Pensions Committee. I think with COVID, there was very limited opportunity that took place during that particular year. But it may well be something we'd look to adopt as we develop the training strategy and the training plan. We're also having a better version of documentation of training that we will more than likely look to incorporate and record, with greater clarity next year on next year's annual report, Sean.
Okay, because I believe it's a requirement to present the training to committee members, but not the board members at the moment. Although the skills and knowledge requirement is on the board members and not the committee, so it does seem a little bit perverse the way the current regulations are.
Yes, it is a bit perverse. I think our longer term aim will be to be consistent with what you do, and that is make sure that we, as well as document the attendance at meetings, we'll have also document the training that is undertaken, and we're going to do that. And the intention is that will be for both committee and board will be done in similar form for all parties on that side, because we're obviously looking to develop the training strategy for both the committee and board, to work together in terms of receiving training on that side of things as well. So it makes sense to then be able to record and document the training in the same vein.
Okay. Last opportunity for any comments or observations. No.
Are the board so the board happy that becomes your annual report?
Yes, so we are approving the report for publication, I believe.
Yeah, fine by me.
Thank you. In that case, Matthew, we can move on to the governance review. Is this
Lovely.
you first, or are we going straight to Aon?
We can, well, yeah, I very briefly. Obviously, as we know, we have the full governance review, but my covering report comes after the full governance review in your pack. So you go straight into the Aon report on that side. I think what we're asking for, and Daniel will take you through, is the work that they've done, the work they've taken to committee. There is a number of areas that cover the board as well within regard to this. As part and parcel of it, and I think it just demonstrates hopefully some good practice as we move forward in some of those areas. So I'll pass on to Daniel and Scott to actually take you through their findings with regard to the report and gather your feedback as we go through. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. So as Matthew said, just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Scott Campbell from Aon, and along with my colleague Daniel Canaris, who's here as well, we carried out the governance review of the fund. So the full report is included in the meeting pack from page 55 onwards. And what I'm just going to do today is just talk through our key findings and recommendations, and then take any questions you have, and we can have a discussion about those. So just a quick bit of background about what the governance review covered. So the key aspects, what we're doing as part of this is looking at the fund's policies and practices, and very much focusing on how things are done, how decisions are made, and ensuring that follows the best practices that we see across the LGPS. So we covered four key elements of our review. So firstly, we went through all of the key policies and strategies, looked at those that are required through the regulations, and also looked at best practice and considering updating any that had been not updated for a while. We also sent through the effectiveness questionnaires that you would have seen. So that was completed by both pension committee and pension board members, and thank you for those of you who completed those. We also built in our observations from attending the March pension committee and pension board meetings. And then finally, we had a number of discussions with Matthews trying to pull in his aspect of it from the key, as being a key officer of the fund. And then as part of that review, how we carry it out is we assess the governance of the fund against Aon's governance framework. And we developed this by looking at national best practices, also taking account. So some of the key areas of this are looking at scheme advisory boards, good governance reviews that has been carried out recently, and also looking at the pension regulators code of practices to ensure that all kind of national guidance is followed. So that's basically what we were aiming to do as part of the review. So what did we find out? So I think one of the key things to say is actually there, overall the governance was very good. I think we were encouraged by that, and there were a number of areas that did follow national best practice. I think in particular we noticed quite a clear sign of improvement over the last 12 months or so. A number of policies were put in place over that period, and that was really encouraging to see. And then there were a number of areas of improvement that we recommended as part of our review. So just to quickly kind of go through those. So on the policies and procedures, we recommended that a risk management policy was put in place. This was one of our kind of key recommendations to ensure that this is looked at in conjunction with the risk register, and there's a clear policy for assessing all the different areas of risk in the fund. One of the other key recommendations was having a fund-specific conflicts of interest policy, noting that there is a council conflict of interest policy, but not a fund-specific one. And this was as part of a wider recommendation of trying to ensure there's the right level of separation between the fund and the council, and that was something that came through as part of our review of one of the things we're really trying to ensure. And then also updating the breaches procedures and logs and ensuring that's taken to both pension committee and pension board. So those were the kind of key priority policies. There were some longer to mid-term policies that we were looking at. And as Matthew has said, we're getting an action plan together to put those into the business plans going forward. And then the next kind of key part of the review was looking at the structure of the pension committee. So we were recommending that the committee has further representation from other employers in the fund, noting that currently the committee has one district council representative, but obviously there's, I think, over 200 employers in the fund, including colleges, universities, academies, admission bodies. So it was looking at, is it appropriate to try and get representation from those different sectors, and the best way of doing that. And also, whilst looking at the employer representative side, would it potentially be appropriate to have increased employee representatives as well? Currently, there's one member representative, but then also we're thinking about, is it appropriate to potentially have another one? Could be a pensioner representative instead of an active member. So those were some of the key recommendations. In terms of specifically thinking about the pension board, we recommend a number of meetings was increased from 2 to 4 per year. This has already been actioned, so that was one that we could quickly tick off. So we're pleased to see that is happening. One thing we mentioned in the report, that at the March meeting, we did observe that there was fairly limited kind of participation and discussion from all members, although, obviously noting that a number of the members were new in those roles at that point in time. And I understand training has been provided since then. So that's something we'll kind of just, keep an eye on and something to note. But there were reasons for it, we thought, when we went through the review. So that's a very, very kind of whistle-stop tour of the report. Before I take any questions, I just wanted to provide a quick update of what's happened since we provided that report. So we presented to the report at the June Pension Committee meeting. And then following on from that, we've developed an action plan with Matthew to try and move forward some of the recommendations. One of the key recommendations in terms of the structure of the Pension Committee, we are producing a report to go to the September Pension Committee, and this is basically looking at a little bit more detail of the different options and then trying to put together a firm proposal to the committee of how or our recommendation for how that is changed, covering both the type of members that could be included and also the process for doing that. And then after that's been to the pension committee, then we'll look into putting that into practice. So I'm just going to kind of pause there and take any questions, comments, observations from the report. Yeah, over to you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments or observations on what Scott has presented, or the more detailed?
I have one, Sean. I suppose in the report it talks about lack of engagement by the board members during the meeting. So none of us have spoken during this meeting. That probably isn't very good. Just going through the report there, it does mention that. I think when you viewed the meeting in March, that there was very little response from board members. So I suppose challenged myself to make sure I comment more during the meeting. I think on that one. But yeah.
Absolutely, John. Sorry, Scott. It's a very good point. I think that as you get into, it's difficult when you're having only 2 meetings a year and you're going through a lot of information to kind of keep up, and you're just kind of listening to Matthew go through the reports and that kind of stuff, and it's hard. When we get to having more meetings, hopefully the board can kind of, like you said, take it upon yourself to challenge things, to ask questions, to get a bit more kind of understanding. Obviously, training on that kind of thing will help as well. But the more that a board can work kind of together with a committee in a way that, there's an interaction, I guess, between the board and the committee. The whole idea of the pension board in the first place is to kind of assist the committee. And where we see that in other funds working really well is where the board really gets their heads together and says, right, what can we actually do? What can we actually get stuck into? How can we help? Obviously, there are some areas which they're regulatory, they have to be done, decisions have to be made by the pension committee. So those areas, obviously, the board doesn't get involved with, other than overseeing the decision. But there are plenty of areas we've seen with other funds where boards can actually get involved and can actually make a difference and can actually feel like they're maybe contributing a bit more towards the kind of the whole running and the whole governance and structure of the fund. So that's kind of a challenge, I guess, we're setting for you over the next. We appreciate it's not going to change immediately, but over the next kind of 1 to 2 years, is to kind of think about challenging yourself. Can you think of ways to get involved and help out a bit more, and hopefully that leads to everyone feeling a bit more kind of engaged with the whole process.
I was question those members who have served on the board for more than just today, if there's any feedback in terms of why you believe you personally haven't been able to engage as much as you would have liked. Is it an issue, as Daniel says, about the infrequency of meetings means that you're not engaged enough in the subject matter? Is it a training issue? What else is it that we could do to help improve the level of engagement of the board members? John Abbott.
Yeah, I feel kind of quite out of my depth, really, because I don't have the knowledge of the subject matter. So it's very difficult to challenge something, or you don't feel confident you know enough about it. And I'm sure I'll get there. I'm sure my knowledge would increase, but I don't know. I think if we are engaged in a particular task to work on a particular area, that might be useful. Taking a small step.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Just an observation from myself on that. And I don't know the members of the Gloucestershire Committee, so apologies to the members of the Gloucestershire Committee. But one of the observations I found about the Oxfordshire board is sometimes they didn't have the knowledge to understand all the reports, but they questioned whether that was because the reports weren't clear enough, and they questioned whether the committee members understood enough. So if you're not understanding enough in terms of what the report's presenting to you, one of the questions is, are the committee? And does that mean the committee are failing in their duties as well, because they're sitting quietly and not really understanding the reports, that the brilliant reports Matthew's written, obviously. And the board at Oxfordshire provided quite a lot of challenge to the standard ways some of the reports that I'd written had been presented, because they couldn't understand them, and they weren't sure that the committee could understand them, and they weren't sure, therefore, that the committee were making full use of the officer time and the officer input. So sometimes being out of your depth, I'm not sure you are, but can actually be helpful, because asking those questions, which you may think are ignorant, actually sometimes are the best questions to ask.
If I can just say, the reports are very clear. Not a problem with understanding, because the information is presented very well. But I just feel that if something was wrong and wasn't being sort of done properly, and there was a problem, underlying problem, I don't think I'd pick it up.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I'll talk to Matthew about how that might be developed going forward, other than obviously training.
Yeah, and if I could chip in, Chair, on that point, good point, John. I would say that it's not necessarily your job to kind of spot errors in the reports as such. It's more when you're looking at the committee and the committee's business. I guess your role in that is just to kind of be confident that the committee is making kind of reasonable decisions. You know, you're not there to kind of scrutinize the minute detail of every decision made and everything that Matthew necessarily talks through. But like you say, the role of a board member has developed over the last few years. Obviously, boards only came in kind of about 6 years ago now. And I think around the country, there's been a gradual learning and developing of what boards can actually do. And like you said, if you can think of a project or some projects that you can get actually involved with and have discussions and learn a bit more about, you'll be able to see that there's more to being a board member than just looking at what did the committee do and saying, yes, that's fine, we're happy with that. So that's a really good point. And on the training point as well, you made, I think that's a really critical kind of thing. And I know it's something that Matthew's got on the work plan going forward. It's not just we need some more training. That's obvious, everyone needs more training. It's really about identifying where the gaps in knowledge lie for everyone, and everyone will be slightly different, but it's about having an analysis of what needs there are around training, what competencies do people have. And so there's something called the SIPFA knowledge and skills framework, and alongside that there's competencies across multiple different areas. And it's really important to kind of assess which of these you're confident with and which of these you don't know, and then you can kind of work and really plan forward to kind of work out and get to a point where everyone is covering that.
See, Matthew, you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Daniel. And what I was going to say is a thank you to those board members that have recently completed the knowledge assessment that we sent out from Hyman's. If you didn't manage to undertake that, it's still available. I understand, even though Hyman's are now collating the results, and the whole idea is to your point, John, that you made earlier, is that now we can be done that assessment, we'll be able to identify the areas where we can then build a training plan to give you the knowledge that you need to be able to discharge your responsibilities as a board member, and give you the knowledge to be able to then ask those questions that you know that you need to ask. So again, thank you for those that have done it. That information is being collated, and that will come back with a plan to you moving forward. I also do think that there's a point to be made. If you look at the work program that we're coming through with, there are some key deliverables which I envisage and potentially envisage that the board will become quite heavily involved in, and that's the output of McLeod and the impact of McLeod and how we deal with McLeod, and also the next triennial valuation as we go through and into the next triennial valuation as well. And challenging, the committee in terms of the way that they will go through. So, you'll be working very closely with the committee as we go through and receiving the same training around that valuation side. So hopefully that puts what's being said here is something that will start to come through for you. But again, thank you for those that took the time to fill out the knowledge questionnaire, because that will greatly help us in answering some of those points. Thank you, Sean.
Stephen?
Thank you very much indeed. Can you answer me which committee or board thinks that it is the main scrutineer of the pensions? Is it the pension committee? Do they regard themselves as scrutineers, or is it the board here who have the scrutiny function? Would you please advise me? Thank you.
Matthew, are you picking that up, or do you want us to pick that up?
I think all three of us give an answer. Yeah. Daniel, you go first since you spoke first.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say that the pension committee is not a scrutineer role. They are the ones that actually make a lot of the decisions around what the fund does. And the pension board, part of the pension board's role is to kind of oversee. I don't think they use the word scrutiny directly, but it is kind of a scrutiny role. It's like an oversight of the decisions made by committee. Having said that, it's not to necessarily challenge the decisions made by committee. It's about, were those decisions made in an acceptable manner, following an acceptable kind of process. So if you looked at an investment decision, for example, made by the committee, and you didn't like the way they'd invested that money, it's not your place to say, well, we wouldn't have done that, I would have invested it differently. It's your place to possibly say, if you thought they had gone against regulations or gone against their own strategy in actually making that decision, and they'd made a decision that was kind of unreasonable, then it would be your place to kind of say that. So do you see the difference?
Yeah, but yes, is it that the main area of scrutiny is the process rather than the result?
I would say so, yes. I would say that there's a pension board, it's you're overseeing the way they're making decisions rather than the decisions themselves.
Thank you. Very useful.
Matthew, have you got anything to add to that?
I was going to wait for you to answer first, Sean. No, I think that Daniel has summed that up accurately from my viewpoint as well.
I do think under the regs we have a duty, if we believe the committee is acting outside the regulations. So we have that scrutiny role there, that we need to go back to the committee if we believe they're acting outside the regulations, or report through to the regulator if the committee refuses to listen to us. So we have got a scrutiny role in the sense that the committee must stick to the regulations, and it's our responsibility to report them to the regulator if they don't, and they don't listen to our concerns. But yeah, I think the original description of the board was both a critical friend and scrutiner. I don't think I use those words, but yeah, we're both there to assist and to scrutinise. So we have a bit of a joint role.
Yeah, and if I can, if I can, Sean, I'll just kind of bring in, and it goes back to the point where I made about the annual report that's produced by the board as well, because that's the opportunity for the board to actually highlight any risks that they perceive that exists, that the committee or are around to the pension fund. So even if the pensions committee are undertaking certain activity that the board feels is a risk, that is your opportunity to be able to highlight that. And as Sean said, you can move it beyond if you feel that the committee are not taking that in situ. So there are a number of ways and obligations for the board to actually make sure that they're undertaking that, undertaking their responsibilities there. Thanks, Sean.
That was going to be my next question. Where do we find items to scrutinise? And the annual report is obviously an ideal place just to see that things are on track in a proper manner.
I agree, and I think it's also this comes back to the comment I was making earlier about the reports that the committee get. We should be able to look at those reports and say, are they getting the right information to run the fund effectively and in accordance with the regulations? And do we believe they can understand what the reports they're getting? So I agree with Daniel, it's not to second guess every decision they make. It's to look at what information they're receiving, how they're interpreting that decision and their processes. Are they in accordance with the regulations? And reporting back. So, Daniel,
and I think doing that puts depth into the pension board.
Yes. Daniel, you want to come back further?
Yeah, Sean, one last thing I would probably say on in terms of when the boards were set up, the description of what the boards did was kind of deliberately quite vague by the kind of central government, by the decision makers there. So they use the word assist. They say assist the kind of fund and assist the committee, but they don't actually say what that means in practice. And they did it on purpose because each fund is set up differently. Each fund has a slightly different structure. And so they wanted the boards to almost go away and find out how they can best assist. So it is quite difficult to pinpoint one thing and to say, well, this is what you should be doing, because of that firstly there's the deliberate vagueness, and secondly each fund is slightly different. So it is about each board working with each committee within each local authority to work out how they can help best.
Okay.
So there were no key performance indicators that we could use to judge performance on?
Obviously, you've got the key performance indicators for the kind of administration of the fund, that type of thing. So you'll see KPIs in reports, but the kind of committee itself doesn't have KPIs that you can assess the committee against, I would say.
I think that's where the committee has its and the fund has its business plan, yeah, obviously what happens in the setting of that business plan will all obviously be brought back for the board to actually overview. So yes, in theory, some of the activity that they're undertaking, you'll be able to hold them to account through their activity that they've said that they would do as part of the business plan. Hence, I think the first report that we went through, which was the fund performance update, is one of the key ones, because that is giving you a lot of the KPI information on administration, but also about the investment performance and the funding position, which are the key drivers and the key objectives of the pensions committee. So that's where that report really comes to the fore. You know, in terms of your ability then to ensure that the committee are doing what they said they were going to be doing.
Thanks. Thank you.
But But I think that's a very good question, Stephen, that the board could actually always ask the committee. Is, you know, how does the committee know it's doing its job? What KPIs is it using to give the committee its? How does the committee get its assurance? And if it can't answer that question, then the pushback will be onto the officers to develop more KPIs. But I think, as Matthew said, there are a number of KPIs at the moment, and I'm not sure there's KPIs that Gloucestershire are missing compared to Oxfordshire or the average, the standard fund. And that, I think, comes back to the governance review. Didn't find big problems with the governance of the fund. But I think, you know, we can always look to improve KPIs. And if the board has any observations on the existing KPIs, then that's the sort of role the board has to raise those issues.
There's also this strange phrase, isn't there? You don't know what you don't know.
That's true. And that's partly why I suppose I'm here as well. You'd hope that if there are issues that Gloucestershire is hiding from you, that I would be able to help you identify those areas.
Yeah, I think yeah, you're exactly right, yeah, Sean. And obviously, you know, we have external audit on us every year in terms of that, and also the reason why we're undertaking the governance review here is to you know, as an independent coming from the outside, to make sure that you know, if we don't know what we don't know, we should know it, and maybe that's what you need to go and do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And my understanding is there's been a national good governance project, which is currently with the Secretary of State. And one of the proposals that's been discussed is having an independent peer review every 2 years, I think it is. So again, we'll get help from external sources to shine a light on the Gloucestershire Fund, to make sure that the Gloucestershire Fund is being governed well. So you will have help. It's not all down to the board members. John or Michael, did you have any observations you wanted to make on this issue about the role of the board and how the board can be more effective? It's fine if you haven't.
Just missed training, and then we haven't had any training because of COVID since then. I do recommend I do welcome the recommendation that the consideration to increase the membership of the committee is there. That maybe we ought to have more scheme member representatives on that. That's a good suggestion. But other than that, not much from me at the moment.
Thank you.
No, I support doing more work on this issue in a future meeting would be a good idea. I'll be up for that.
And John Topping, anything further from you?
No, I was just going to say that people's knowledge, my sort of start of meetings, I don't speak unless I've got something really to add to the conversation. So that's how I operate. So no, I mean that was a good discussion about where we are. Obviously, as you said at the start, I've been on the board from the start, so I did get training at the very start and probably have more training than others. So that probably works in my favour. And obviously, my role at the council as a 151 officer helps me as well. So I probably have a different knowledge base anyway. So for me, I did have a couple of comments on the report, if that's all right. but I'll shut up for now if we're still if we're still in that discussion.
No, do you want to make those comments now, John?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of questions where the report recommends about having its own cybersecurity policy, and I'm just wondering how that will work, because obviously my knowledge is that the fund sits on the Gloucestershire County Council's IT, and the County Council will have its cybersecurity, same as we do at the city, and all those policies in place. So I'm just wondering how they can have a cybersecurity policy which doesn't align with the county councils, and therefore the question is what would be the benefit of having that policy? And then the reverse of that is it says the fund doesn't have its own business continuity plan, which does surprise me because that should be outside of just cyber. So I suppose one is why would we recommend they have it for one, and then it's surprising they haven't got it for the other. Does that make sense as a question? I suppose that I'd expect the fund to have its own BCP, but cybersecurity has to align with the county council because they sit on the county council systems and must comply with the county council, I would have said. But that was just a quick question there, really.
Again, Matthew, do you want to pick that up or do you want me to pick that up?
Yeah, no, I can pick up, you know, on those points. I think, yes, we will be working, I think, with Aon. But the first thing we want to do is make sure we fully understand the council's cyber strategy and cyber security policy, and whether or not, you know, the fund's policy might be to adhere to the council policy, or it might be parts, but at least the fund needs to have its, you know, opinion on its cyber security. And especially because some of the administrative system sits outside of Gloucestershire County Council IT. Obviously, it has a route through it, but we work in a hosted environment with our IT provider, so it might well be that there are certain things that we need to incorporate separately. In terms of business continuity plan, you are correct. That was one of the things that was on my very long to-do list when I came in. I think we're about 3/4 of the way through working with Gloucestershire County Council colleagues in the completion of our business continuity plan. I think I've got a couple more pages of a spreadsheet to complete, and then we will have a fully formalised business continuity plan. But again, what we'll then do is get that reviewed to make sure it's consistent with the objectives of the pension fund, whose operations are potentially slightly different to the county council.
And just to bring in some kind of wider context as to why, so the pension regulator has since 2014 been kind of charged with taking an interest in public sector. It never used to be, but from that point onwards it was. And the regulator is currently undergoing a whole revision of its kind of codes, and it's merging a lot of different codes, including the public sector one, into one kind of super code, the new code that's coming out. In theory, hopefully later this year, it's coming out. And people have seen various drafts of it, and it's kind of well known that one of the things the regulator is focusing on is making sure that funds have a fund-specific cybersecurity policy and business continuity kind of plan. So it is kind of recommended by the regulator that there's that separation. It is quite important, I think, because yes, you don't want the fund to have a cyber policy that goes completely against what the council's policy is. They will be aligned, but from what we've seen on other funds, when you've got a council cyber policy, they probably don't even really think about the fund. It doesn't really mention the pension fund. If it does, it's really mentioned very briefly. So the fund really needs to think about all of the different aspects of where its data is coming from, where its data is going to, having that kind of mapping and understanding that, and then putting together a policy that's specific to the pension fund and how the fund operates.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what the BCP says, because obviously with councils recently like Cleveland and Redcar had total loss of IT for so many months. So it'd be interesting to see how the pension fund will say they're going to manage with zero IT for 2 months. That's your challenge now, not mine. So that's fine. Anyway, right. I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Any other questions or observations on the governance review? No, I'm assuming, Matthew, we will receive regular reports back as to how the committee takes this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The work plan that will go back to committee in terms of the recommendations and how we will proceed with those recommendations are due to go back to committee in September. And then we will obviously, that will come through to the next board meeting for scrutiny in October as well. So it will be an ongoing item that board members will see as we make the progress, because there are a number of recommendations and we can't do them all in one go. So there will be, this is where it will develop into a work plan around the governance review. So that work plan will come back, and then that will be constantly reviewed by the committee and the board.
Okay, thank you. I think that completes the open session of the meeting then. So I think agenda item 8 is to move us into private session.
It is, Sean. Could I ask that you read the text, please, and then can we pause there
briefly so I can get my colleague to stop the live feed.
Okay, so we're asked to resolve that in accordance with section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meetings for the following agenda items, because it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be disclosures to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act, and that the public interest in withholding information outweighs the public interest in disclosing information to the public. People to happy to so resolve.
Yep, happy with that.